In this video, I'm going to show you how to add movement and swing to your drums. Step 1 is going to be all about sound selection and the kick drum. So let's look at how you can pick the perfect kick drum for your track. So I've got an example here and I'll play the kick drum for you. So this is going to be a jump up style track, and I've gone through my samples and picked a heavy style kick drum. So I'll just show you where I've picked it. So just in my drums and then in here, and then I went for number 3 from my drum and bass collection pack. And then I just whacked it in and put it in all the way along for 16 bars, as you can see here. But this may not be the final kick drum I choose. At the moment, this is just going to be a placeholder. So what you should do is use a reference track to determine which kind of kick drum to go for, then look through all your samples, look through Splice, and pick a kick drum you think will fit best. And then later down the line, when you add your bass and your sub to the track, you may need to change out the kick drum so that it fits better. So at the moment, it's just a placeholder. When you add the bass and the sub and when you sidechain and all that good stuff, you may decide to change the kick drum to something that fits it better. So I've got another example here of a kick drum I've used in a bass style track. So I'll just solo it. Sounds like this. And as you can see below, there's like 1, 2, 3 kick drums we've tried out. And in the end, we've only gone for this top one here. The other ones didn't work. So you can see there's a lot of trial and error going on once the bass is added, because further down there's bass is added and all that. And we determined that this kick drum sounds best with the bass and with the rest of it. So once you've got your kick drum down, it's time for step 2, which is to use sound selection again to pick your clap or your snare. So again, this is going to be a bit of a placeholder, but it depends on what kind of track you're making. So here I'm doing a heavy jump up style. So I've just got a snare here, and then in this track, I've got 2 claps layered. So this clap here, and then this clap here. And together it sounds like this. So let's just grab them. Now it's going to be up to you if you decide to layer your clap or snare or not. What I recommend you do is search for samples at the highest quality, and then the higher quality the sample, typically the less you need to layer it. But a good rule of thumb as well is if you're working on a lighter style track, you generally don't need that many layers, but if you're working on a heavy style track, you generally need more layers. So for example, if you're working on a house track, you might only need 1 light clap. But if you're working on a really heavy bass tune, then you might need several layers. And I've seen some people use 4 layers, just 2 layers, even 10 layers. It's really up to you what you decide to do. That's where you're going to have to experiment, but use that general rule of thumb that I just explained there. The lighter the track, the less layers. The heavier the track, the more layers. But again, just be careful. And sometimes you can layer snares and claps together, so you could test that out as well. That generally works better for drum and bass style tracks, but it's worth giving it a shot. So again, this is going to be a placeholder. It might sound really good. It might not sound great once you add the basses and everything else. So don't spend too long on this. Just grab a sound you really like and then go with that. Don't spend like hours layering the clap before you add the rest of the track in. Okay, so we've done the kick and the clap / snare. It's time for the hardest step, step 3, which is going to be the hi-hat. And this might be multiple hi-hats depending on what genre you're doing. So let me just show you 2 examples. So I've got a jump up style track here with 3 different hi-hats. One is a ride, one is an open hat, and one is a closed hat. And it sounds something like this. Let me play them together. And you can hear how that is adding swing and movement to the track already. Now, some people like to put the instruments offbeat like this to give it more movement. So you could try that out. But I've done it the other way around and added the movement to the end of each hi-hat here, as you can see. And what you're going to want to do with drum and bass style tunes is have a consistency in your swing. So you can see how the ride is continuous, the hi-hat is continuous, and then the closed hi-hat is in the same place every time. So just make sure it's continuous and there's no like glaring gaps or anything. And then I've also got a lot of reverb on these elements as well to give it that depth. And then in the bass style track, this is probably one of the most important parts of bass music, getting the hi-hat right, and it's really hard to get right. So what I recommend you do is use samples and loops as samples specifically. So you can hear here, we've got 2 hi-hat layers, and that one's not turned on, this one, but this, just with the hi-hat on its own, it sounds like this. Which sounds alright, but when you add it with all the basses and everything, it sounds a bit weak. Listen. Now let's add the other hi-hat from the looped one. And with everything else. And that's added some craziness. So let's listen to this loop on its own. And with the hi-hat as well. You hear how it's just adding movement and swing to it. It is like multiple layers, so you can try and recreate the sound on your own. But it's always good to use samples, I find, and loops. So I'll go through each individual sound for you. There you go, it's just simply that, with some percussion as well. And that also adds another layer to the clap. So the clap is actually 3 layers. So yeah, it's a really good idea to try out different things. Lay your hats if you can, and get them sounding juicy. I've actually had a track recently that had like 4 layers on the hi-hat, and it made it sound really, really strong and good. Just be careful with any higher frequencies though, because it can make it sound too harsh. So you might have to EQ stuff or de-ess it. But generally hi-hats are hard to get right. Again, you can just put a placeholder down for now and then add in the swing and everything else later on and layer it when the bass is in, so you know how it's going to sound. Because I believe originally this track just had this hi-hat in here, and then once the bass was in and everything, we realized it wasn't powerful enough, so we added this layer, and then it all sounded really good. And this track is called Badman Sound by Arknade, me, and Turtleneck UK. It is out on Spotify now, so go check it out. So the hi-hats is where a lot of your swing is going to come from, but it's not going to be the only place. You've got step 1 and step 2 in mold with the bass, which is going to add a lot of movement. And then there's also step 4, which is percussion. So you can get your percussion from anywhere. It's crazy what you can use for percussion. You can use smaller hi-hats like I've done here. And you just find little areas in the track where nothing's playing and add them in, and it adds swing and movement. So let me just play it. You hear those tiny little things, and then when you play it with the track, you probably won't even be able to hear them, but it just adds that swing in the background that you'd barely even notice. And then without them, it sounds like this. So it sounds way better with those extra elements. And you can also add other percussive elements like this one here. And there's just so much you can do with percussion. You just got to find the gaps and add little elements. And you could try like the snare thing like in that one there as well. And it's also worth grabbing your reference track and seeing what they do for their swing, and then copying them do, and then coming up with your own little ideas as well. So in this track, I don't really have any swing on it yet, because it's early days, but let me see what I can come up with so you can get a good example of what I'm doing. And also it's a good idea to wait till all your bass elements are on as well, because when you add percussion, you might add it where a bass already is, if you haven't put the bass on yet, where the bass is going to be. And then when you have a percussion element playing at the same time as a bass sound, it might not sound good. Right, let's turn that right down. What else have we got? So let's go to our Percs section. And you get the idea. And then of course you can add like effects in later as well. Might take that out in the transition bit. And you get the idea. So my fifth and final step for adding movement and swing to your drums is to add transition phases. Now you can see it on this one. The typical rule I do is a small transition after the first 8 bars and then a bigger transition after the first 16 bars. So typically it's 1 bar like this for the first 8 bars, and then typically it might be 2 bars for the second 8 bars. And then of course your bass will react to that. So for example, you might have like a respace on the end of here to help it flow into the next section of the drop. And this is really helpful as well for when you're creating transition phases into breakdowns as well. It gives you room to work with, so the drop doesn't just suddenly end. And of course you can do this with house and bass music as well. And I recommend using snares in that section and just experimenting, and also using your reference tracks. Find reference tracks that have really good transition phases and you'll understand how effective it is. So that's my 5-step process to creating really swingy and movementy drums. I hope you enjoyed. If you did, please leave a like and drop a comment on what you'd like to see from me in the future. Make sure to check out my website, sample packs and coaching to get your hand on. And I'll see you all in the next one.